All right. There are many, many Ice Shards videos and guides and all that out there. Why am I throwing my hat in the ring? Well, I've been playing this build a lot since the beginning of the preseason, whatever you want to call it, since the launch. And I've really experimented a lot here. If you've seen my previous videos, I have tried many, many different things. I did not copy paste this build from anyone else. I kind of looked out there a little bit about some of the recommendations and, getting some ideas. But a lot of this came together kind of organically through experimentation, trying a lot of stuff that you guys in the comments recommended and helped me with. So I know that this is kind of late in the preseason, you want to call it, but this kind of is the culmination of me playing this build and my knowledge here. And I think I have something to offer that you're not going to find in any other video, because I sat here and I played this for hours and hours and hours for 2 weeks, nonstop, not giving up and trying everything I could think of. And there's a lot of little modifications that you can do, particularly at different gear levels for doing content that might be harder than, you're geared up for. I have now successfully completed a tier 60 Nightmare Dungeon on my character at level like 82. That's what I did last night. We can do that. This is a very, very strong character. It excels in clearing. It excels in crowd control. It excels in having exceptional defensive buttons to be able to get out of trouble. And it has respectable but not godlike single target. This build really clicks for me. It does exactly what, in my opinion, a magic caster, a master of the elements should do, is be able to control the entire screen full of monsters and blow them all up at will. And that's what this build does. This is going to be a very deep dive. You can't go wrong playing this build. It does all of the content in the game, except for Uber Lilith, which, basically nothing in the game can do right now. So yeah, just lean back, grab a cup of coffee or a beer, and let's start talking about it. All right, so first up, just to decide if this build is for you, what is the playstyle? Would you like playing this? You go into playing a magic caster or a wizard, whatever. Everyone has their own different preconceptions about what they want. So yeah, I'm in a tier 42 Nightmare Dungeon. So these monsters are not absolute pushovers. You can see they are monster level 96. I am level 84. You can see we have a lot of crowd control. That is really annoying. You can see they're hitting me really, really hard. Lots and lots of poison and stuff. So this is not an easy dungeon, but I will show you how to play this build and why it's so strong. The main reason is control and mobility. We have the ability to full screen, chill, and freeze everything. Frost Nova, this is our go-to. Frost Nova currently on a 10-second cooldown. 4 seconds are reduced from that if we kill 4 monsters that are frozen. And this is an instant freeze. It does 0 damage, but it's an instant freeze skill that then, the main thing that we have going on here is we have the Ice Shards enchantment, which around frozen enemies, almost the full screen. If an enemy is frozen, it will continually shoot a single Ice Shard at it. So the full screen of frozen enemies, every single one is going to be hit periodically with an Ice Shard. So the Ice Shards enchantment, really to make the build pop, is necessary, but I do spec this out when I'm doing very, very hard content, right? Because it's like pretty mediocre for single target, and there's other enchantments that can, give us more durability or more utility as well. We'll talk about Firebolt a little bit later, but it doesn't have anything to do with the playstyle. And then on top of that, this is not necessary to play the build, but it's really, really good for playing the build, to the point where I think most Sorc builds actually really want this body armor. It is a Raiment of the Infinite. When you teleport into the monsters, it will pull all of them in, stun them up to 3 seconds, and then, that enables you to hit a lot of monsters in a single area. Raiment of the Infinite, you can play without it, but I don't recommend it. You're going to suck in a lot of monsters, you're going to freeze them with your Ice Nova, and then your Ice Shards will automatically hit them, and then they will explode and shatter. To wombo with that is I go back and forth between these. When we talk about our passives, I'll talk about all of the subtleties here. But when we're really looking to blow up the screen, we use the Shatter passive right here that says enemies explode for 25% of the damage you dealt to them while frozen, which then ends up, since you sucked in all the monsters, kills everybody. However, I do switch to Avalanche here for single target damage and better mana sustain when it's necessary. All right, and that's basically it, is teleport in, Frost Nova. Basically, everything dies right away, but if it hasn't died right away, if it's harder, then we can manually cast Ice Shards, which will do significantly more damage, right? Because the enchantment only hits once, but Ice Shards manually cast will hit 5 times. Let's show the playstyle real quickly in here. So generally, you can even kind of just group up as many monsters as you want to, suck them in, and then I didn't even press any other button, right? All I did was teleport in and press Frost Nova, and the enchantment itself will go off and kill them. And then if I'm getting hit too much, if I'm a little scared, then I can press my Deep Freeze. Literally just take your hands off the mouse and keyboard. It will do a continual chill, which in this game builds up and freezes the monster, which then also lowers your cooldown significantly. Since the monsters are already frozen, then you don't even have to worry about, the Ice Shards is already going off and hurting the monsters as you come out of it. And then your cooldown of your Frost Nova will be up no matter what afterwards. And then the Ice Nova just kills them. Doesn't even matter. And that's really the simple part of it. Like, there's a lot of positioning. There's a lot of other buttons that you can use. There's managing your barriers for more damage, stuff like that. But this playstyle knowledge alone is enough to make you dangerous. Even you see the scariest monsters, you can kind of just go in here, teleport in just an Ice Nova, and that's going to do enough damage by itself. If I get a little scared, then I can press my Deep Freeze. I can heal up during my Deep Freeze. And then I can attack a couple more times if I really need to kill the monsters. I got my Frost Nova up again, and it automatically just kills them. And that's kind of just the build working for itself. Like, I'm occasionally pressing some pots here. If I did get really scared, I can press my Flame Shield here. I also have 1 point of Ice Armor here from my amulet. I do recommend always having just 1 point into Ice Armor. And yeah, if that playstyle looks fun and engaging to you and interesting and just like, and once your cooldowns, you know, dealing with mana and cooldowns, that's going to be a lot about what we talk about today. That's a really, really big part of it. Once you've dealt with those problems and solved them for putting the build together, it is incredibly rewarding to play. You will have better clear than basically anyone else on the screen. Those pulverized druids are sitting there waiting for their cooldowns to do their little wombo combo, and yours is up like every 6 seconds. You're gonna be, you know, you're gonna be the big AoE clear, popping the whole screen on the block. You're gonna be looking and feeling really good. All right, so I didn't scare you off from playing the build, so if you're still here, assuming you still want to play it, let's go into the beginning. So how would you level this build? This is something that I usually don't address, and I think in this game, it's particularly interesting because leveling is kind of weird. Really, the short of it is this build has pretty strict mana issues to even be playable, honestly. Besides that, the cooldown will feel kind of bad until you solve that. So without any cooldown and definitely without any of the mana solving aspects, you're going to be in a tough spot. Level 40-ish, I think, is probably about the earliest you'd want to play it. And that's really only assuming you got like 2 of the really good mana solution aspects. I'd really just want to spec into this build after you hit level 50. And in fact, for leveling, I actually strongly recommend my Shock and Sun Sorcerer here. This is what I leveled with, and I've seen examples of other people leveling with a Sorc, and I actually liked it the most. And this actually looked better to me than how I saw other people leveling. I would strongly just recommend level up to 50 and then respec after that. This build carried me, as we can see, I'm level 51 at this video. This build carried me really, really hard. You know, I played up to level 50 with this build. I got into World Tier 4 with it. It got the job done. And honestly, the great thing about it is it had 0 mana issues whatsoever. This was a great leveling build, and this is what I recommend at the current stage of the game with what I know. But really, pick your favorite leveling Sorc build, go with that. You know, find one of the mana solving aspects that we're going to talk about in just a second, and then respec at that point. So after that, we really just have to talk about mana. This has been a big topic with people that have been trying this build. You can run out of mana really, really easily because we go for a lot of attack speed. Base mana cost on Ice Shards is 30. You can dump your entire mana pool in just 2 seconds if you don't have anything to deal with the mana cost here. So starting off, what you're going to have no matter what when you first spec into this build, which is not enough, unfortunately, is you're going to take Frigid Breeze right here, which gives you 20% chance on lucky hit to generate 15 mana, right? So if you have a 100% lucky hit, that then gets multiplied, you know, times the 20% chance, that then can give you the 15 mana if the enemy is vulnerable. So this alone, you know, doesn't really solve the solution. Even if you had a 100% lucky hit, it's only 1 out of 5 times that you get 15 mana back. It's still good enough to be worth taking, especially until you get really good lucky hit. This isn't really going to be paying too many dividends. I actually advise making a beeline straight for Avalanche right here. What Avalanche does, you know, this is still lucky hit. This is still only 20%, but against vulnerable enemies, this is a 20% chance on lucky hit. But this combined with Frigid Breeze really will solve the first half of your mana issues. 1 out of 5 times on lucky hit. So after your lucky hit, as long as the enemy is vulnerable, your next cast of Ice Shards, Frozen Orb, or Blizzard will cost no mana and deal 40% increased damage. It is a noticeable boost in our single target damage. So between Frigid Breeze and Avalanche, right, we get 2 20% rolls on our lucky hit for, you know, saving our mana when we're casting. This is our basic solution for dealing with our mana. This is the first half. This will make it so you can kind of fight a couple packs of monsters and then wait. This isn't really, you know, the real solution here. So the next thing to deal with mana is aspects. These are really the first thing that you're going to go for. Starting off, you're probably going to need at least 2 of them to make your mana feel pretty good. Later on, you're going to have at least 1 of them no matter what, depending on your play style and depending on your gear, you know, mana cost reduction. You're going to find that in other places. The first one we're going to start off right here, which also locks you into a certain passive, is the Avalanche Key passive. Now applies to 1 additional cast, the Aspect of Frozen Memories. This goes on a weapon, gloves, amulet, or ring. This will apply to 2 additional casts if you put it on a staff, which is kind of neat. We don't use a staff. Do not use a staff. So what this does, right, is remember Avalanche makes the next cast of Ice Shards cost no mana. This will make it that when you proc, it'll make the next 2 casts cost no mana. And the nice thing here is it can snowball. It can continue stacking, right? If you have 2 casts that have a chance to proc it again, you can stack it back to 2 casts. And with this alone, this will mostly solve your mana, assuming you have enough lucky hit. But if your lucky hit is low and you're not proccing Avalanche, if you're relying on lucky hit too much only for your mana sustain, this isn't really going to totally solve your problem. And so this one's really good, and particularly once your lucky hit gets totally solved, this alone can kind of just carry you. But if you don't have amazing lucky hit, this isn't really going to do it for you. The other 3 that I recommend are unfortunately not very common. And this is a reason why I don't recommend directly hopping into the build right away, is you're going to want to try to farm for at least one of these. I'm only using one right now. My gear's also kind of good, so I only really need one of them right now. You're probably going to want to combine 2 of these when you get going at lower gear. So the first one is Prodigies. This says, using a cooldown restores between 15 and 25 mana, Sorcerer only. The nice thing about Prodigy right here is it's unlocked by completing Witchwater and Hawazar. Unfortunately, right, the ones that go into your codex that you get permanently, those are bottom rolled. So that means it's only 15 mana. If you're using the bottom rolled one, you're going to want to use at least 2 aspects no matter what. What this does is when you use a cooldown, it will just restore up to 25 mana. And we have a lot of cooldowns. We have a lot of cooldown recovery rate. We are popping those constantly. And that is actually the only mana sustain aspect that I'm using right now. And my one that I have imprinted right here is actually a mid-roll. That's how rare it is. These are the only 2 that I found at all total so far playing. This one's pretty rare, but this is great, right? Every time we use Ice Armor, Frost Nova, Teleport, Flame Shield, or Deep Freeze, all of those will give you your mana back. And as long as you're paying attention to your cooldowns, weaving them in intelligently, you won't even notice that you're running out of mana. However, if you're being super aggressive and you really need more mana, so unfortunately, Umbral in the Codex, is totally bottom rolled. Restore 1 primary resource when you crowd control an enemy. So, if you freeze 10 monsters, you only get 10 mana back. Now, if that's 4, right, you get 40 mana back for freezing 10 monsters. That's incredible. So the roll on this makes a big, big difference. I used this one with 3 for a while. It didn't totally solve my mana, but it was pretty good. So you definitely want to look into that. And then the last one right here is called the Incendiary aspect. I actually have never found a good roll of this. Unfortunately, the bottom roll is 5%, which is pretty bad. But on lucky hit, your burning damage, which we are always burning enemies, we'll get into that a little bit later. Your burning damage has up to a 10% chance to restore 10 mana on lucky hit. This one is actually potentially really, really good if you can get a good roll. Unfortunately, I never have, so I can't speak to how good it is. But theoretically, this is really, really good for us, especially once you get good lucky hit. There's all of these aspects, and then on top of that, you want to be going for mana cost reduction. So the 2 main slots that you're going to find mana cost reduction are on your offhand and on your amulet. As you can see, I currently have a total of 29.1% mana cost reduction, which brings my Ice Shards from 30 mana to 21 mana. That's the main thing that you're really going to be looking for here, is getting it on your amulet and then on your offhand. On top of that, you're going to want to go for resource generation on your rings if you can get it. What this says is gaining mana from any source grants that percentage more mana than normal. So if you have 10% more mana of your mana regeneration and you get 20 mana back from the Prodigies, that will go from 20 to 22. You get 10% more on top of that. If you have good gear, you can get over 20% very easily, mana generation, and that can make a significant difference in all of your mana restoration. It stacks with your mana regen, it stacks with all of the recovery sources. This is actually a very good mod that I think is undervalued when used in combination with these other aspects that will give you big chunks of mana. That's really all of our solutions for dealing with our mana. There are the 4 different aspects. There's Prodigies, there's Umbral, there's Frozen Memories, and then there is the Incendiary. Early on, when your lucky hit's not very high, when you're not proccing Frigid Breeze and Avalanche very often, you're probably going to want to get at least 2 of these aspects to really deal with your mana. Once you get more mana cost reduction on your gear, then you can probably remove one of those aspects and go for a damaging aspect like I did here. You're going to be always trying to figure out like, okay, overcompensate early, make sure your mana is solved. And then as you find better gear that makes your mana a little bit more comfortable, try to remove some of those mana generation things. I'm at the point now where when I'm fighting regular monsters, I actually spec out of Avalanche and I go into Shatter for better full screen clear. But even with my current setup, when I'm fighting single target, I do run out of mana and I want to go back to Avalanche right here. I just spent 54,000 gold just for you guys. I want to go back to Avalanche here. It gives me 40% increased damage and it makes sure that my mana sustain is a lot better in the single target. It's really this balancing act. Pay attention to what your mana is. these are the tools that are available to you. Use the ones that you need, until the build feels comfortable for you. All right, next up is cooldowns, cooldown recovery rate, all that. So cooldown reduction is very important. Why is that? Our entire build is based around cooldowns. I currently have 39.2% cooldown reduction. With much better gear, I could get over 50%, I believe, which I definitely want. I want as much as I can get. This is a combo character. It's all about teleport in, Frost Nova, use all of your abilities, pop the entire screen. And then when your cooldowns are down, if you're not using them properly, this is a cooldown-based character. When your cooldowns are not available, you are a wet noodle. Much like mana cost reduction, and this is going to be a pain point, is your amulet and your offhand are a very big part of what make this build feel good. I struggled to get good gear, so if you saw my previous videos, all of that was experimentation to try to make this build work. What could I do when I have bad gear? These are the two slots where your cooldown reduction really comes to play. The big thing is your offhand has cooldown reduction on the implicit. We do not use a staff. Do not. You cannot. Staff. No. Verboten. As you can see, my offhand is not incredible, but with this alone, I have 23.8% cooldown reduction. And then on top of that, I have another 14.6%, which could go up to 23, right? I can get quite a bit more here. 9% more on my amulet right here if I had a really good amulet. That's all of my cooldown reduction. That's where you want to get it. Good amulet that has cooldown reduction, mana cost reduction, and an offhand that has cooldown reduction and mana cost reduction. That's what you're looking for. That's your main two things. When you have those two pieces, you're already like halfway done on the good gear for this character. As you can see, a level 5 Frost Nova is 19.7 seconds. And so since I have +5 to the rank of my Frost Nova, 1 here and 4 here, I have a level 10 Frost Nova with then that 39% cooldown reduction, which brings me down to a 10.2 second Frost Nova. And Frost Nova is our main priority here. The more that this is up, the more we can do our combo, the more we just obliterate the entire screen. You want to go all out in leveling up your Frost Nova. It gets a lower cooldown with that and get that cooldown reduction on your build. And then the last utility stat that you're going to be going for here is Lucky Hit Chance. Now, there are variations of this build that don't go for Lucky Hit. I am not a fan of that. Trying to be diplomatic here. I'm not really a fan of that. I think you're missing too much. And the big reason for that is I do one thing that those builds don't do. But just for the basis right off the bat, right? We get Avalanche for Lucky Hit for mana. We get Frigid Breeze for Lucky Hit for mana. I also missed this mod, sorry, when I was talking about mana earlier. But this is kind of a bonus anyway. This isn't really a crux. But up to a 5% chance on Lucky Hit to restore up to 20% of your primary resource. So 5% of the time that you Lucky Hit, you can actually get back 21 mana as well. This one obviously is also really good. You can get this on multiple pieces of gear as well. But yeah, those are like the base things that we're looking at when it's talking about mana. And then there's one thing that I do that the other builds don't do. And that is I believe in Snap Freeze. I am a Snap Freeze truther. I've seen this proc enough times that I think it's very valuable. And I learned this by doing my weird off-meta, crappy versions of the build experimentation. This is what I learned from playing around with Blizzard, from playing around with Ice Blades, and playing around with Frozen Orb, is really leaning into trying to figure out ways that I could freeze monsters when I had bad cooldown, right? That was the journey that I was going down, is my Frost Nova had a 20-second cooldown because my gear sucked. What do I do? How do I freeze the monsters? I need it to make the build work. And so I was experimenting with, Blizzard and everything, and I saw the Snap Freeze here, which on Lucky Hit, I have a chance to instantly freeze. I'm already investing into Lucky Hit right now. All right, pretty cool. So how often is this going to proc? So when I have a barrier up, my Ice Shards has a 31% chance to Lucky Hit. And each Ice Shard, I shoot 5 of them, has a chance to Lucky Hit. So there's only a 2.79% chance for it to proc for a single Ice Shard. That's not very good. All right, hopefully I did the math correctly here. Newport brass faucet cartridges too are interested. I need a better calculator on my computer. So what we did here, we multiplied 9% times 31%. That gives us 2.8%. 1 minus 0.028 to the power of 5. That's the probability of it not happening. And then 1 minus that is the probability of it happening. That means we have a 13.2% chance per cast of Ice Shards, assuming we have a 30% lucky hit, of freezing the enemy. But that means roughly 1 out of 7, 1 out of 8 times that we're freezing the enemy. And that's not bad. Every single time that we freeze an enemy, it is a gigantic boost to our character. And I find that pretty cool. You can get Lucky Hit on most pieces of your gear here. You can see that I have it on my glove. I would like it on my offhand if I could get it. I have it on one of my rings. Ideally would have it on both of my rings. I think the resource generation, while nice, right? I can use a different aspect to kind of deal with that. I would rather just have some more Lucky Hit. We just go for it everywhere that we see it, everywhere we can get it. I actually have a higher Lucky Hit than I thought, because I am also using Frigid Fate right here, which gives me an additional 15% lucky hit. And then we're using Advantage right here for even more. So let's actually see what my real lucky hit is after I hit some enemies. I've actually never really looked at that. Looks like my real lucky hit is 33%. which is not too bad. Okay, so that is the core stuff that really matters for this build. That's like what goes into it. That's the hard problems that you're gonna have to solve. Let's talk about the aspects in the gear and a little bit more nitty gritty right there. So for the helmet, there's no unique helmet that we care about. You just want to go for something like this. Life, cooldown reduction, the mana is pretty nice. I have some lucky hit chance while I have a barrier. This is just really, really good. I am using 1 topaz, you can see. This gives me damage reduction while crowd controlled. Damage reduction is an absolutely incredible stat. I strongly recommend it. We'll talk about defenses and damage reduction in a bit, but you can see that I have quite a bit in my build. I had none 2 days ago, and then I invested into it, and yeah, night and day. It's really mandatory. So yeah, life, cooldown reduction, lucky hit, right? This is the general stuff that we're going for. Max mana is nice, just helps us, you know, sustain our mana a little bit better. Body armor, Raiment of the Infinite is best in slot. There's nothing compares. If you choose to play the build without this and you have one, you are making a mistake. Like I said, teleport in, stuns the enemies, just makes it so much better. This is night and day. I wish I had a better one. But if you don't have one, you can still play the build without it. Because the Ice Shards is hitting AoE, it hits the whole screen. As long as you're freezing the whole screen, you're still going to hit them, you're still going to shatter, but it's just not quite as good. But if you want to go tankier, you can do that. So in that situation, I would go for a body armor like this. Life, damage reduction, a little bit of damage, something like that. I get significantly tankier when I equip this thing, but I have way less control, way less, you know, management of the monsters, and it makes clearing the whole screen a lot more difficult. So this body armor theoretically is significantly better, right? But the raiment just feels that good that I find it pretty mandatory to, you know, take the build to the next level. The gloves prioritize rank of Ice Shards. That's the, you know, the most important one. 4 ranks on your level of Ice Shards, really, really big for your damage. And then lucky hit, critical strike chance. You know, we like to crit as well. I haven't talked about crit too much yet. Crit is actually, you know, it's really good for our damage, but we don't prioritize it as much. Like vulnerable is actually more consistent damage for us right now because we always make the monsters vulnerable with Frost Nova and with Ice Shards. So vulnerable is actually higher priority than critical strike. After that, you can use if you want to. This is really fun to use, and especially if you don't have a raiment yet, this is a really good, you know, stopgap to use until you get a raiment. It kind of fills the slot a little bit of what the raiment does for just helping your clear out. However, it really is a pretty weak item, so you do want to swap out of this a little bit later because it doesn't really offer you any defense, which, you know, is kind of bad. What this says is enemies that die while frozen have up to a 20% chance to unleash an additional Frost Nova. That can just chain, you know, keep proccing the whole screen. Really helps clean out your clear. You know, just like the body armor, if you don't have the Ice Heart Brace or you already have a raiment, I would use something like this. You know, a little bit of life regen if you haven't damaged recently. I just like having my life up when I'm walking around town. You know, this is a very small number. I have 8,300 life and it's only 146 a second. It's just nice to have your life topped up, you know, between fights. We have almost no sources of percent armor in this build. Just a little bit is actually like a more multiplier for our build. So it's really, really big. You know, armor is the best defense in the game. So anything that gives you more armor is really good. So, you know, that's a good value on us as well. Gigantic additional life pool. The healing received is pretty mediocre. I would rather not have that there. I'd rather have something else. But that's what I got. You know, we'll go over the aspects in a second, but, you know, the armor on top of that just goes hand in hand. The boots, really want that level of Frost Nova. I think that that's the number one thing you're looking for. Movement speed, mana cost reduction. Mana cost reductions on boots as well. I think I missed that. That fire res, unfortunately, is a dead stat. Res is just so, like, I just view it as such a dead stat. Look at this, 53 fire res goes to 46, right? I get 5% fire res from that stat. Okay. And the damage reduction is only half of that. So I only have 2.5% less fire damage taken from that entire mod on my boots. Whereas instead, I'd rather just get like, you know, flat damage reduction, right? I could go on a whole rant about it right now, right? But like this 10% damage reduction, right? Flat damage reduction is, I know there's diminishing returns with the multiple sources, yada, yada, but it is so much stronger than res. It just reduces the damage flat up. Anyway, I'd rather not have that res stat. I would roll over every single res stat. The other thing is because we have very high intelligence, you know, we're smart cookies, we actually have a lot of res already built into our build, right? And there's pretty diminishing returns into investing more into it. You know, the 50% increase right here, remember, it only gave me 5% more. Once you get really high intelligence, res stats on your gear are particularly bad. And then remember, we do not use a staff. Remember, guys, no staff. On our wand, you're going to use a wand. Right on here, we want to go for critical strike chance, lucky hit. Same priorities as we have everywhere. Crit chance, lucky hit. Intelligence is very good. You know, all stats is actually pretty decent. Intelligence is its own more multiplier. Our intelligence alone, this is giving me a 63% more damage multiplier. Int is really good, and you are going to go for high int on your Paragon board. You know, if you look at my later stuff right here, this requires 600 intelligence to activate. So you are going to need a good chunk of it to, you know, use your last Paragon board. And then vulnerable damage, critical strike damage, critical strike chance, stuff like that. Really rather those all stats, I'd probably rather have critical strike chance. My current setup right now, my crit chance is lower than I would like it to be, but this is the best wand that I have right now. And then on the offhand, we already went over this: cooldown reduction, crit chance, mana cost reduction. Stats are decent. This is not an incredible offhand. Vulnerable damage would be good as well. All the stats that we already talked about, that's what you care about. In my other body armor pieces, I'm using rubies. There are diminishing returns of putting too many topazes in. So I just have one topaz here because I already have so much damage reduction. And then the other ones are rubies for more life. And then I have emeralds in my weapons because we are always attacking vulnerable enemies. We're trying to crit. This is just 24% more crit strike damage. In terms of the amulet, rank of defensive skills is absolutely crazy for our build. I wish this was rank 3. This is really, really sad that this amulet is rolled so poorly. Rank of defensive skills, this is actually giving me my 1 rank for my ice armor. It saves me a passive point. That's our ice nova. That is our flame shield. That is our teleport. We actually use 4 different defensive skills in this build. So rank of defensive skills is gigantic for this build. Mana cost reduction, cooldown reduction, and rank of permafrost is actually really good. But, anything else that we already talked about is really good. What permafrost is this guy right here. More damage to elites. This brings it from 15 to 30. So that's pretty good. Then in terms of the rings, I actually have been prioritizing max life more and more. As you can see, I have 8,300 max life. So I actually really like that stat. Lucky hit, crit strike, crit damage, and then vulnerable damage as well, resource generation. And yeah, that is all of the gear and all of the mods that you're going to go for the gear. Now, let's talk about aspects. So in terms of the aspects, I think this one's pretty mandatory. We have so much stuff, which we'll see on the passive tree, that gives us value by having a barrier. Barrier is really the extra defensive layer that Sorcerer is built around. Other builds have Fortify. Other builds have other sources of damage reduction. We don't have that. We don't have Permanent Unstoppable. We don't have any of that. Barrier is our lifesaver. So we get a barrier from Ice Armor. We get a barrier from Damaging Elite. And then on our passive tree, we actually get a barrier when we use a cooldown, which is right here from Protection. I get a 2,500 max life barrier for 2 seconds every time I use a cooldown. Remember, we have a bunch of cooldowns. Most of our skills are cooldowns. Barrier is what keeps us alive. And so, this rolls up to 7K right now. I wish this was better rolled. This is the best I got right now. But yeah, this is gigantic. This is a 10-second barrier that happens every 30 seconds. So that's pretty incredible. Remember, I get lucky hit. I get resource generation while I have a barrier. I do more damage while I have a barrier. It's incredible. You want to have more barrier stuff. Raiment to the Infinite right here. That's a go-to. And an additional one, though, I really like is Ice Armor makes you unstoppable. There is a lot of crowd control in the game. Rax actually put out a great video this morning right here called The Biggest Problem with Diablo 4. The entire video is about how crowd control is the worst thing in the game right now, and I fully agree. There is way too much crowd control. I did a tier 52 nightmare dungeon today on stream that took me like 20-something minutes because it was the one with the spiders, and it was cold enchanted, and it was constant. I had to like really kite things around because there's so much crowd control. I had to constantly just like run away. Anyway, because of that, I think this is an incredible imprint, but unfortunately, I can't fit it on my current build. You deal 20% more damage to vulnerable enemies while you have a barrier. We usually have a barrier. Enemies are usually vulnerable, so this is a great mod. This armor one, this will give you up to 50% more armor, right? We have almost no other sources of increased armor. I go from 5,400 armor to almost 8,000 armor when this thing fully procs. I only have to hit 20 times within 4 seconds to get that full maximum effect. And since I'm hitting the entire screen constantly, this is pretty close to fully active all the time when I'm fighting big groups of monsters. Really, really, really good. This one I think is pretty mandatory. Lucky hit chance is increased by 20% while you have a barrier. We just saw how strong that was. That brings me from 26 to 31% lucky hit. That's pretty incredible. This one, you deal more damage to immobilized, stunned, or frozen enemies. This one is absolutely mandatory. Why is that? Put this on your amulet. It'll be 50% stronger. It will actually be up to 50% more damage if it's on your amulet. Unfortunately, I'm stuck with this right now. What this does is we stun and freeze enemies all the time. At this current setup, right, is 70% more damage all the time for our normal combo. On top of that, when you stagger a boss, when that bar goes all the way to the max, it turns blue, and then you're in like the DPS phase of the boss, they count as having all ailments. So they have immobilized, stun, and freeze. So you get an additional 35, or if it was on the amulet, you would be at 150% more damage, which is a huge increase in your damage when you're doing the DPS phase on a boss in particular. Now, there are sources of immobilize. There is an aspect that you can immobilize when you run through an enemy for 3 seconds with Flame Shield. And then the other one is you can go all the way into Wizard's Meteor. If you want to cast Meteor, I know people do it. All it's doing is giving you that 35% more damage, in the same multiplier. If you want to do that, more power to you. I think the Flame Shield one's okay because it's really easy to run through an enemy and, you get that 35% more damage. But investing 3 passive points and then casting that Meteor, waiting like the full 1 or 2 seconds, whatever it takes for it to come down, making sure that the monster's in that tiny little AoE just for 35% more damage. I think that's a very extra, like, trying to scale a little bit more damage that's not necessary. I'd rather make my build feel good. Anyway, I don't really believe in the Meteor tech. But you can do it. It's viable. Don't let me yuck your yum too much. So on my amulet, this one I would rather swap with my weapon, right? So the weapon one's stronger, but I take less damage from crowd control or vulnerable enemies. Unfortunately, that amulet's properties won't show if I'm in town. It's really annoying. But you can see that my damage reduction from vulnerable, my base for my Paragon tree is 18.5. And then I put on this aspect right here, and it goes up to 49% damage reduction from vulnerable. Absolutely great aspect. I think it's pretty mandatory for the build. So yeah, actually, the more I think about it, the more I'm talking through this, I think I lucked into the right play right here because less damage taken is pretty darn good. Yeah, I'm actually going to keep it here. Thanks for letting me talk to you guys about that. Next up, this one is absolutely mandatory. Ice Shards Pierce up to 4 times, dealing 20% less damage per subsequent enemy hit. I think I have a perfect roll in my stash. I should just re-imprint this. What this does is usually Ice Shards will just hit 1 monster, but with the Pierce, it'll actually go through up to 4 monsters because we are grouping up the monsters in a tight group. Really, really nice. Like, we group them up, and then it'll pierce through all of them, hit all of the monsters instead of just one of them. That aspect's definitely mandatory for it to, like, really start feeling good. Next up, I already went over all of the mana ones. I think these all kind of go in the same category, so I'm not going to go over it. You're going to want at least one of the mana aspects, possibly 2 of them when your gear's not as good. And then on the offhand right here, crit strikes with your core skills increase your attack speed by up to 25% for 5 seconds. This is a huge quality of life because we have no other increased attack speed in our entire build. This is 25% more damage. Those are the aspects that I recommend for this build. Let's see what else for gear. I do want to call an honorable mention here for the Frostburns. These can be pretty fun when you have good lucky hit, but you don't have either of the other uniques. If you don't have a raiment and you don't have an Ice Heart Brace, you can use a Frostburn. On lucky hit, you have a 25% chance to freeze enemies. This is okay. We have that base 9%. I don't know if this stacks additively or not. Let's pretend it does. That brings that 9% up to 34% chance to freeze on lucky hit. That's pretty darn good, right? You're going to be freezing most of the time that you're attacking when you hit 1 monster. So it's okay, but you're giving up so much, right? You're giving up lucky hit chance, like a lot of lucky hit chance to, equip something like this that doesn't have any lucky hit chance on it, which is kind of weird. The main reason why I can't recommend actually using Frostburns is because the +4 rank of Ice Shards. If you look at the damage on my Ice Shards, it says 3035 as I continue killing all of these fly swarms. But if I take this off of 3035 goes to 2300. I lose exactly 20% damage if I lose that 4 levels. So it's too good, right? That's just 20% more damage that you can't give up. Where are all these fly storms coming from? So yeah, that is the gear. Hopefully that is enough of an overview. There's always tiny modifications that you can do. This is my bias. This is my preference. I've tried the other stuff out there. In my opinion, for me, this is the best. I am very, very happy with this. Basically, I want exactly what I have, but better. I want more lucky hit, more crit chance, more crit damage, vulnerable damage, all of that type of stuff. And then speaking of this, I really want to emphasize, please watch this video if you don't understand how to exactly upgrade your gear. I think it's a great video that should get some love. Go into a lot of detail of like, hey, you're trying to compare 2 pairs of boots. This will help you get into the mind space for understanding that. Like, I want to look at here. I want to see like, hey, I got 136 crit damage, but only 37% crit chance. So my critical strike damage, I'm only getting, 1/3 of the value for that investment, right? Whereas I'm always hitting vulnerable enemies. Normally, right, if I have 100% crit chance, I would rather go for crit strike damage than vulnerable damage because the vulnerable damage is already a larger number. And so proportionally, I will get more percent increase by getting 30 crit damage than 30 vulnerable damage since I have only 37% crit chance. If I get 30 crit strike damage, it's actually only equal to like 11 crit strike damage. All right, speaking of which, time to move on to abilities. And let's teleport out of here before we get swarmed too much. So remember, we are speccing into this build at level 50. We are not using these skills. We don't actually use Frostbolt or Firebolt. You could, if you really need to, you could sit there and right click with your Frostbolt. I did this early on. You don't really want to. And the nice thing there is it does chill the enemies. Unfortunately, the way that this game works is if it doesn't say chill or freeze, it does not chill or freeze. So Ice Shards, despite being called Ice Shards, does not actually chill. So Frostbolt does chill, although if you use the Frostbolt enchantment, it will, but we can't really fit that in the build too easily. Unfortunately, you have to put 2 points in here, so you can just put 2 points into Firebolt and say, screw it, I don't care. 1 point into Firebolt, 1 point into Enhanced Firebolt if you need to use it. Down here, you want to put everything into Ice Shards and Destructive Ice Shards, 5 out of 5, all the way into Destructive. Don't use Greater. Greater's bad. Don't use it. And then we want to level up our Ice Shards as much as possible. After that, 1 point into Flame Shield, going into Shimmering Flame Shield. You don't really get that much out of Flame Shield. It makes you fully invulnerable. It heals you, makes you run faster. It only gets 0.1 seconds per level. 1 point into Teleport to go into Shimmering Teleport. You get so little out of leveling this up that we just don't put more points into it. We get more cooldown reduction from our gear than by putting points into it. I have 3 points into Elemental Attunement, crit strikes on lucky hit. I want to call this out. Like, this is very optional, but when it does proc, it's really nice. You get that additional free defensive skill, right? We're using all 4 of these. It is nice to get that sometimes. 37% chance to crit. Then I have a 31% chance to lucky hit. And then there's a 15% chance if you lucky hit and you crit to reset a cooldown. And then it has a 10-second cooldown. That is a 8.2%, right? It's not nothing. So we have an 8.2% chance on lucky hit, on crit, for a 15% chance, all the way going down to, because we hit 5 times with Ice Shards, 8.2% chance right now to reset a cooldown. And we're going to end up attacking a lot, right? Not to mention that, we freeze the entire screen with our Frost Nova or with our Deep Freeze, and then Ice Shards is just hitting the whole screen. It's hitting a lot, right? 8.2, that's going to proc enough that it will be noticeable. So, it seems really low, but once your gear gets good, this is proccing at least like once a pack, once every other pack. 1 free Flame Shield can save your life. And then the big boy, Frost Nova, this is basically our most important skill. This is almost more important than Ice Shards. We want to freeze as much as possible. We want that cooldown as low as possible. We go into Mystical Frost Nova to make sure that we always make enemies vulnerable. Also makes bosses vulnerable for 6 seconds. Now, we do make enemies vulnerable with Destructive Ice Shards. Our Frost Nova is not always up. Sometimes we're really far away and we're just kind of cutting an elite. Like we just showed, we get way more damage out of vulnerable. It's 146% more damage multiplier with my current gear. The monsters being vulnerable is too good for being able to finish them off. Mystical Frost Nova is just a go-to. When we kill the enemies, the cooldown goes down. So, I actually have a 6.2 second cooldown here if I kill at least 4 enemies. 1 point into Align the Elements. This is pretty interesting. 1% damage reduction against elites for each second you haven't take damage, up to 40. This goes up to 3 per second. This would be pretty interesting if you kite around enough. The thing is, we already have a good amount of damage reduction from other sources, and I really don't want to rely on not taking a stray hit from a monster. And I think this is a really weird one. I think it should base be maybe 2%, maybe make it do 2, 4, 6% per point. And then maybe there's a world there where it could get kind of interesting, but it can save you from a single hit. It's okay to have that 1 point, but yeah, I think this is kind of a really weird node. And then protection, like I said earlier, using a cooldown grants 30% life barrier. This thing is absolutely incredible. This is, mandatory probably for every single Sorc build, honestly, to the point where it's almost should be baseline in the character. After that, Icy Veil, barriers last 50% longer. And then the main reason for that is frost kills, then, snap freeze. A lot of builds don't use snap freeze. I explained myself earlier. I think it's really, really good. When we talk about enchantments and Paragon boards, we'll talk about Devouring Blaze. We just use this for the 30% more critical strike damage against burning enemies. So, which is pretty good, but this is actually, is this worth 4 points? I'm actually really on the fence if this is actually worth me spending 4 points for 30% critical strike damage against burning enemies. Yeah, you 100% could take these points out and put them into something else. Then down here, Deep Freeze. I don't know, if you're playing this build without Deep Freeze, I really think you're missing out. I really, really do. I actually just don't see a world where Deep Freeze doesn't make this build better. Yeah, I'm trying to play devil's advocate right now, and I get maybe you'd want something else on the board. I know some people like to play Inferno. It's a little bit better than using a Raiment. I just don't think Inferno's that good for this build. Deep Freeze hits the entire screen. It freezes the screen, which enables your passive. I think it's too good. Prime Deep Freeze here. This is pretty good. Gain 10% of your base life as a barrier for 6 seconds for each enemy you froze. Big screen full of monsters. You're in one of those rooms that swarms you. You freeze 10 monsters. That's 4,200 barrier for 6 seconds. When it ends, your non-ultimate cooldowns are reduced by 50%. So, Deep Freeze goes for 4 seconds. So you start off with 12 seconds on your Flame Shield. And then after Deep Freeze fully ends, then those 8 seconds go down to 4 seconds. Boom, your Flame Shield's already almost ready and you're good to go. Then we go into Permafrost. Icy Touch does 12% more damage to vulnerable enemies. Frigid Breeze here, cold damage gives us mana. We already talked about that. And then Hoarfrost right here, which gives us 9% damage to chilled enemies as well as 18% to frozen enemies. And then last up, like I said before, if you deal with mana, if you're doing single target damage, Avalanche is what you want to do. And you can change this whenever you want. But if you want to clear full screens, Shatter's incredible, but your mana is going to be a little bit more dicey. So that is the full skill tree regarding the Paragon board. Nothing is perfect. I spent a lot of time with this. I spent a full hour yesterday and probably about another half hour today looking at this. I'm sure there's other stuff you can do. I don't know if anyone's actually fully figured out a fully optimized Paragon board, but I got a pretty end game one here and I'm happy with it. I've done a lot of tuning right here. Obviously, right, I'm level 84. I have 16 more points that I can put in the Diablo Builds GG link. I'll put in those final 16 points. Nothing is fully set in stone. If you see something else that works for you, feel free to use that. This is what works for me. So the baseboard, this is what we're going for here. I think Erudite here is 100% droppable. I think you could drop these 2 nodes, but a little bit more base res, why not? But you could probably drop these if you need some additional points right here. I think both of these are pretty good. 4% max life is just really good. In my first glyph socket, I'm using Flame Feeder, which does increase damage against burning targets. I guess I'll just talk about the enchantments right now. All right, we'll do the enchantments first and then the Paragon board, because this really leads into it. So like I said before, Ice Shards, frozen enemy, automatically hits them, mandatory for the build. Although, I do want to call this out for a honorable mention, is if you are doing very, very, very hard content, like if you're doing a tier 60, tier 70 Nightmare Dungeon, and you're underleveled and you're not confident that you can survive enough, if you're playing hardcore at all in a Sorc, you're already using this. Flame Shield automatically activates when you take fatal damage. Only happens every 2 minutes. You'll see a debuff happen on your bar. You'll see the Flame Shield go off. Boom, okay, I'm in danger. That was my cheat death mechanic. I actually recommend replacing Ice Shards. This will make clearing way worse, right? The Ice Shards isn't hitting the whole screen. Firebolt is also very defensive for us, so I recommend putting Flame Shield in here if you are, doing very, very hard content. This will save your butt many, many, many times. The other honorable mention that you could use is Frostbolt here. Direct damage applies up to 15% chill. This allows you to chill with Ice Shards. This is really good if you're fighting a boss. If you're gonna fight a boss and you're just caring about that, you want to use Avalanche and you want to use Frostbolt right here. This is going to be your setup because more chill applies more of the stagger meter to the boss, allows you to go to that DPS phase sooner. But in the regular, clearing everything, you want to use the Ice Shards enchantment. And then the other one that is absolutely mandatory is the Firebolt enchantment. I made videos about playing around with Hydra and doing other stuff, but really this gives us dependable burning damage, which we need for our defensive layers. So what this does is it means all of our direct damage will apply burning damage for 8 seconds. Does very, very little damage. We don't care about this damage number. What we care about is what it enables us to get. Like I said earlier, is we do get Devouring Blaze, 30% more crit strike damage against burning enemies, whatever. 75% if they're also immobilized. Yeah, if you want to use Meteor, whatever. 70% crit strike damage is not that much for how much crit strike I have right now. However, the Paragon board that it allows us to use right here is this one, Burning Instinct, and we'll get into that in a second. And that Burning Instinct board is why we use the Firebolt enchantment entirely. Like to the point where probably most builds, like probably the Lightning build, also does the same thing because of, primarily the defensive layers that we get. So yeah, we're using Flame Feeder right here, 10% more damage to burning enemies, as well as increased damage to burning enemies per dexterity. As you can see at my current level 15 glyph, this is 43% increased damage with just 29 dex. Very, very, very powerful. Second board here, we want to go into Frigid Fate. This gives us 15% lucky hit. Damage reduction from vulnerable enemies, very, very powerful. Damage reduction will save your butt. Lucky hit chance over here, we get an additional 10% lucky hit chance between these 3 nodes. This chilling node is very mediocre. The only reason I'm going over here, this is just nice, like this works out nicely, is I want these 2 dexterity nodes to activate the glyph, but the chilling's okay. The glyph that we are using here is Destruction, critical strike damage with core skills. Core skills are our Ice Shards, as well as 12% more damage with critical strikes. And then Oppressive right here for more vulnerable damage, as well as damage reduction from vulnerable enemies. Really, really good for our build. With the extra points, I'll take all of these Dangler nodes for more damage reduction. So, we get 4 plus 4, 8% damage reduction right here. Pretty good. So yeah, we're using Burning Instinct right here. This is the big value that we get from using the Firebolt enchant. What this is Cinders right here, big damage to burning enemies. This one's gigantic, damage reduction from burning enemies right here. We get 8% here, as well as another 4 for 12% damage reduction from burning enemies. Then we come around here to Safeguard, damage reduction from elites. So we get 23% damage reduction from elites right here, and 100 flat armor. This node is absolutely cracked. It's one of the best nodes in all of the Paragon boards for Sorc. They have stacked this board to the point where, yeah, they basically make Firebolt like a mandatory enchant. If you're playing a fire build, obviously you don't use that. But yeah, this board is absolutely incredible. Damage to burning enemies and damage to elites. So I get 36 damage to elites from this one node and another 5% right here. Like absolutely crazy, crazy crack nodes. Not to mention I can get, another 16 plus 10. I can get another 26 with these 4 nodes right here. And then up here, another 12% damage reduction from enemies that are burning. I will take those nodes when I get more points. This board is super, super overloaded. And then the glyph that we're using here is Control. This glyph is pretty insane. This glyph says you deal increased damage to slowed or chilled enemies, which we don't do. We don't slow or chill. Due to the wording, right? You can tell slow is not chill is not slow. That was a total mind twister to me that like doesn't make sense to me. But yeah, chilled enemies are not slowed. Stunned or frozen enemies, we do stun and freeze enemies. So that's 20% more damage, as well as damage to crowd control targets. We're crowd controlling all the time, right? So that's a 65% more damage at my current investment. So crazy, crazy setup right here. And then the last board that we go for here is the Enchantment Master. Sounds like an 80s adventure movie. Big reason why we want to go into this is really the only tree that gives us anything of value. Actually, Icefall would be incredible. I would love to use Icefall, but we don't chill. Now, we could chill with the Frostbolt Enchantment. We can't use Icefall in this build. I really wish like everything chilled if I was doing a cold skill is what it is. Because of that, we are forced to use Enchantment Master. There is not another skill that we can use. The nice thing about Enchantment Master here though is Elementalist is pretty good. We get more max life, we get non-physical damage. Elemental Balance is pretty good, more damage, more intelligence. Really got to get a little bit more dex here. I'll have, in a few more levels. So Ruinous, this is 9 more points to me. And then I have 7 points on top of that. This node alone gives me 36% damage. So this is very high value, against elites, which is what matters. So that's probably where I'm going to end up. And then I'm just going to fill out, the nice to have nodes on top of that. And then, yeah, right here for our final glyph, we are using Elementalist. The reason why I'm using this, like we don't really care about the top line. Paragon nodes get more bonus. This one's kind of weird. It didn't work for a lot of the nodes. Like this doesn't boost the damage reduction against burning enemies. I don't know exactly what wording it needs to activate, but if we deal fire, cold, or lightning damage, they all can increase by up to 5%. Here's the thing. Firebolt enchant, fire. Everything else, ice shards. Well, I guess you're AFK when you're looking at your Paragon board. Anything else that we do, cold damage. And then the nice thing, teleport is actually lightning damage. Teleport hits. So we can activate that and it actually lasts for 10 seconds. So as long as we do that full rotation every 10 seconds, we're going to be teleporting on and off the monster all the time. We're always going to be doing all 3 elements. It's a 15% more damage multiplier. It's 15% more damage. That's, really, really good. So exploit here is probably what I'm going to be leveling up as I run more Nightmare Dungeons. This one's great, right? It's a dexterity one. I have a lot of dexterity in here. How the damage works out, it's only 10% more against vulnerable targets. It gets a lot more damage on the prefix than the Elementalist that I have here. So I think it's going to work out to be very, very similar damage. I have a lot more access to dexterity here than intelligence. You can see I have like some janky kind of like one-off nodes here with intelligence. And instead of that, with my normal path, I can actually get the full dexterity. So exploit's just going to be better on the points. And I think the damage is going to work out to be the same. So, in the final build, I'll put exploit in here. That's what I'm going to level up next. Do want to call honorable mention for a couple things that you can do. Like I said earlier, if you really don't want to use the Firebolt enchant, if you're using other enchants, you can use Hydra up here with Summoned Hydra to guarantee burning the enemy. Obviously, this isn't going to consistently burn the enemy for the damage reduction, but it is really good for single target, getting that additional damage there, and that opens up using like the Frostbolt enchant and getting that consistent chill. On top of that, for just 1 point, you can use Blizzard right here. Blizzard is a great additional point that you can use. Unfortunately, right, we run into the limit of our skill assignment. And so you're probably going to have to drop like ice armor. There's a world where you could drop teleport. Like I would not want to play without teleport, but if you don't have a Raiment of the Infinite, you have good enough movement speed, you don't mind playing without teleport, you could drop that, use Blizzard instead, and use a lot more like patient, kiting, deliberate play style. And that's a viable thing that you can do as well. I would not drop any other skill. If you're not using a Raiment, I actually think teleport's probably the first to go, sadly enough. I think all of the other ones are pretty darn mandatory. Oh, and then the other thing, if you are playing very, very defensive, drop Devouring Blaze, especially with how low my crit chance is. This is not incredible for my damage. You can put those points, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Squeeze a point out of something else that you think is kind of lower value. Get 3 points into Warmth. This one's pretty good, right? You heal 0.9% of your life for each nearby burning enemy. If you're burning 10 enemies, that's 10% of your life regen per second with no limit at all. You're able to really keep your life up while you're fighting gigantic packs of monsters with Warmth. This is a thing that hardcore players are doing. If you really want to play as safe as possible, I think this is a great option to try to fit into as many builds as possible. It is that powerful of a node. Whew, okay. That was over 2 hours of recording. We'll get that a little bit shorter for you guys, the video that you just watched. Thank you for watching. Thank you for the interest in watching my Ice Shards Sorceress guide. Sorcerer. I'm always going to say Sorceress. Thank you for watching my Ice Shards guide. I know there's many out there. This is like the meta Sorc build. So, you know, there's a couple things in here that I've worked through that, you know, I just want to share with you guys my thought process and what I've learned through my journey. And I think that's what really matters as we try to learn and play new builds and, you know, go through our experience as we play these games. So yeah, thank you so much for watching this, and especially if you made it here. Huge thank you. Like, comment, subscribe, whatever you want to do. Thank you so much, of course, to the patrons that make this all possible. Yeah, hope you guys are enjoying Diablo 4. I'm really excited for Season 1. We got a podcast coming up on this Sunday, you know, after this video is posted. There's a lot of stuff coming up. I'm really happy that this game is out, and I really hope Blizzard does a good job and helps it realize its final potential. So yeah, thanks for watching again, and I'll see y'all later. Goodbye.